So the other day, I found a tier list of quote-unquote furry waifus. Yes, this is a real story. No, I am not a furry. But while I was scrolling through it, thoroughly amused, one character suddenly stuck out to me very prominently. No, not because she was hot. Furries aren't hot. But instead because it perfectly matched my art style, and thus began one of the strangest rabbit holes I have ever explored, full of tragedy and comedy, groundbreaking storytelling, and pineapples. And now I'm gonna take y'all along for the ride, because you can't stop me! Good morning, I'm Joel Lamb, and I need to tell you about Prequel. But first, look! It's a friendly bird!
Disclaimer. Prequel contains mature themes, such as swearing, substance abuse, violence, and sexual activities. While most of this video will avoid most of these topics, viewer discretion is advised.
How did a bird even get into my studio? So anyways, after a bit of digging, I found what I was looking for. A website called Prequel Adventure, a 2011 Flash-based thing. If you hear uncertainty in my voice, it's because right off the bat, I have no idea how to categorize this strange piece of media. Almost everyone calls it a webcomic, but I disagree. When you think comics, you think pictures in progression with dialogue boxes or short text descriptions underneath it. But Prequel is more of a blog meets picture book. Mostly text, but with a picture every couple of paragraphs. Well, half the time the pictures are actually fully animated GIFs. And also sometimes there are animated cutscenes. Oh, and that's just a fully playable minigame. What the heck is this? Speaking of playable, right from the get-go, one of the main gimmicks of this story is that it's audience-led. What do I mean by that? Well, the protagonist of the story, while she is her own character, you as the viewer can input whatever you want into this little box, and it becomes a thought in her head. That means that every choice in the story, from the friends that she makes to the things she picks up, from the clothes on her backs to her literal name, was decided by you. Well, not you specifically, but you know what I mean. Now, I'm not going to pretend like this is a new thing, even for 2011. D&D let friends create interactive stories long before the internet, but even before Prequel came out, there was a project called Homestuck, which I first heard about through Tumblr, and every single time I ask someone about it, they always look at me like I just asked about the Magic Guild in Kvach? Don't know how to pronounce that. And every time I ask someone about it, they look at me like I just asked about the Magic Field in Kvatch. I would do more research, but frankly, I can't be bothered. What did you expect? Diligent journalism from the talking triangle with glasses? Eat the subscribe button, shut up! Because even though it's not the first, the way the story interacts with its audience is simply fascinating. As I already mentioned, the audience acts as the protagonist Katia's thoughts. This sets up a weird dichotomy, where what you say impacts the story, but how much it impacts the story is fully dependent on Katia. If she doesn't like your idea, she will still think about it, but then rebuttal it and move on. It avoids the audience getting to also random internet humor, because Katia isn't just a conglomeration of everyone's thoughts. She is her own character with her own personality and interests. You are just here to help her, not the other way around. This doesn't mean that she's immune to the internet stupidity, but she wouldn't jump out a window. At least not twice. But what is Katia's character? Well, you see, she is the Khajiit. You know, the cat race from Elden
Scrolls.
Skyrim. The entire story is kind of a giant fanfiction. Whatever, not important. Katia has just arrived in Kaidru. Why are all the names so hard? Katia just arrived in Kairodale after selling the last of her things to buy the ride, with a pledge to turn her life around and make something productive with her life. What she did before arriving? Well, most of it's not explicitly told by the story, and what is well, let's just say I like to keep this channel as PG as possible, so I will avoid that question. And now here she is, at rock bottom, ready to work her way to the top. But you see, things aren't that easy. They never are. When Katia was really young, she started having a recurring nightmare about a king so intense it would eventually drive her to alcoholism, and that led her to aforementioned not PG things. She eventually figured out how to force other nightmares on herself, allowing her to get where she is now. Unfortunately, shortly after arriving in town and things not going to plan, she relapses, and yeah, it was a mistake. Now, I will not say that this story is formulaic, but there was a certain flow to Prequel specifically, because Katia cannot catch a flippin' break. It's weird because on the surface, it looks like it should be one of those typical rags to riches kinds of story, but instead it's more of watching one of those rage games. You know the ones, where hours and hours of hard work and perseverance can be completely undermined by one slight mistake, and you're back at the beginning of the game. Prequel is like that. I love it. The thing is, most stories follow a simple, predictable, but proven narrative arc. This isn't just me saying this, it literally has a name, the hero's journey. But what I think is interesting about Prequel is that if you look at the hero's journey, there's this section called The Belly of the Whale or Darkest Hour. It's that moment before the climax when everything has gone wrong and it feels like there's no recovery, so that when they finally do drag themselves back, it is super emotionally impactful and we can kick bad guy butt before having a massive dance party as the credits roll. Now, there is nothing wrong with stories that follow the hero's journey. It is so prevalent for a reason. But if we hypothetically extract whatever hero's journey from Prequel, you'll see that instead of a regular structure, you get whoops all Darkest Towers. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, they do space it out, but Katia is constantly going in and out of whale bellies right when you least expect it. When you watch enough media, you start to see patterns and get comfort in this predictability. But in Prequel, it's all gone. You are lost in this world with no one to help you but an alcoholic cat. This unpredictable narrative structure where you have no idea when Katia will literally lose everything is a strangely effective emotional hook. In a way, it turns the audience into a character themselves, where they have to react to everything and expect anything to kill Katia. Watching the way the audience interacts to things as the story progresses is so fascinating. Sometimes with rage, sometimes with sadness, but always with a drive to help Katia get back up and recover. But one question you might have is, what about dramatic irony? You don't know what that is? Okay. Whenever there is significant disconnect between what you and the audience are told and what the characters know, that is called dramatic irony. Think of that moment in the Lego Movie 2 when Emmett is about to ruin the wedding after we discover that that action will literally end the end of their universe. No, I will not run out of weirdly specific places to draw examples from, get over it. But how does that work when the audience are, practically speaking, a character, when they can affect the story knowing things that the characters don't? You'd think that this would be a problem that simply doesn't come up because we are tied directly to Katia, but that's not the case. The narrative semi-regularly switches perspective to other characters specifically to tell us things that Katia doesn't know. Why do that? Well, I kinda already answered the question. The audience can affect Katia, but they cannot control her. Let's take the dinner scene from day 3. Katia's friend promises to drink water to help Katia with her problem, but once dinner starts, we see a perspective switch and her friend spike her own drink with clear rum. A couple pages later, Katia needs to drink some water, but her glass is already empty, so we as the audience are left in a very strange situation where Katia wants water, but we can't let her have it. It becomes more of a game because by all accounts, Katia thinks that is a regular cup of agua, and we have to convince her not to drink it without her knowing why. No matter what, at the end of the day, Katia does what Katia do. Another moment I think is more interesting happens later in this story, so I will avoid spoiling it, but Katia gets mind controlled, brainwashed, something like that, where the audience can see what is going on externally, but no matter what we say, Katia thinks what she is commanded to think, leading to a genuinely infuriating moment, but not in a bad way. And to be fair, the audience did their best to work around the situation, but it's still fascinating. Now, this all brings into question how much of the story is actually user-generated when there are certain moments that, no matter what the audience tries to do, Katia still fails. How much of the story is scripted beforehand and is just an illusion of choice, and we're on a railroad where occasionally we can pick up random unimportant gags that the author didn't think about before adding, and how much of it is actually just improvised? I don't know. I'm not Kazrad, but either way, I don't think it's either good or bad. It's just what it is. Also, isn't it just emblematic of real life, where no matter what, you sometimes just need to steal your best friend's drink? Whatever. Now I want to talk about the art style. And so I will. Man, I am really good at transitions. But first, really quickly, a lot of people seem to be surprised when they learn that this channel has such a small following for the amount of work I put into it. So if you're enjoying this analysis, please subscribe so that you can get monthly videos about interesting media that I love. It's free and really boosts my ego. I mean, supports the channel. Thank you. Back to the video. So this series was made at a strange transitional time for the internet. Like, super early Newgrounds Flash style was a couple years ago, and we hadn't quite reached the more modern digital art, so this series still uses Flash animation and simple paint drawings, so by almost necessity, it has a simplistic art style and very little pixels. As I mentioned earlier, this art style is strangely similar to my own style, with its perfectly round head and oversized eyes. I even did the same things with my pixels, where I have my brush have a 100% opacity drop off so that the paint bucket tool is not an absolute nightmare to use. I just have a lot more pixels, so you don't really notice it. I don't think that this is necessarily important to the analysis, but I still want to put it out there. As to stop looking at my art, I'm not a furry! However, at this point, Prequel is over 13 years old, and if you look at practically any other webcomic or artist in general, you find that their early work almost never matches stylistically to what they became named for. Except Prequel, apparently! Finding this series was like finding a living relic from an internet before my time, and it is so fascinating. Did the creator specifically avoid evolving his style? Or did he already have his style known by heart when he started? I don't know. That being said, it's not remained perfectly static. There are about 5 styles used throughout the series. While the first one is primarily used in this medium shot style with its simplistic beauty, as the series moved on, more and more was drawn in this close-up style with more hair and detail and a pointed chin. There are also more sketchy styles used to illustrate Katia's thoughts, a more cinematic silhouette style, and also whatever is going on in the games. But the important point is this: all of these styles coexist. Just because there is a more professional style doesn't mean that it's always used. Each of these styles tend to fill a role in the story, and it's not like all the styles are drastically different. I just find it interesting to see how the story plays with the medium. Speaking of playing with mediums, I still cannot get over how unlike anything else Prequel is. The series began fairly simply, with just pictures and GIFs, but by the end of the second day of the story, we are suddenly getting full Flash animations. And then day 4, we're getting fully playable games as well. And not just simple mini games, but full RPGs, and later on, actual playable boss fights. And if you're worried about Flash not working on Chrome anymore, guess what? You can still download the game and play it even today. I love this. However, that's not where this ends. I don't really want to spoil too much of it, because the story is so much better when it's a surprise. The series manages to play with the rules of the website itself, creating jaw-dropping effects unlike practically anything I've ever seen before. But unlike something like Deadpool or Animaniacs, where being meta is the whole gimmick, this is literally the icing on the chocolate cake, only used to emphasize the most intense moments. And yeah, the series still enjoys its swinging at the fourth wall, but there are these big moments that are spaced out just enough where this strange medium is pushed to its absolute limit. And I love all of them. But it works so effectively because the rest of the 99% of the time, the series follows its own rules to a T. It lets you get comfortable with your own expectations of what's possible before pulling the rug out from under you, leaving you in a terrifying free fall. But despite, or maybe even because of all this, Prequel has managed to tell a surprisingly mature story. And I don't mean mature in this sense of funny sex laugh, but like an actual gripping narrative balancing alcohol abuse, poor life decisions, trauma, and even a healthy dose of social commentary. Like, I've seen Hell of a Boss, I've glimpsed at Rick and Morty. I know how easy it is to be so edgy and mature that it somehow wraps back around to just being immature. But Prequel doesn't really do that. I'm not saying that it's perfect, or that it doesn't enjoy unnecessary swearing and such, but at the end of day 1, when it says, "You f***ed up," man, I feel that. The early Flash era was notorious for its edgy humor and very not safe for work visuals and themes. While one could argue that Prequel is just another one of those projects that uses the frick word too many times, I would argue that it is a bit more than that. It earns the right to be mature because it actually uses it to tell a mature story that's more than just, let's make your parents have a heart attack. I don't know, I'm just not one who generally enjoys most mature media. I prefer stuff like Bluey or Amphibia, where the maturity is there in the storytelling and emotions, but not necessarily there in the content. Compare that to a lot of other shows where they just use maturity as an excuse to get away with crass jokes, but also a lot of mature stories are just depressing. I guess a lot of people think that being mature means that you aren't allowed to appreciate life's nuances. We're all gonna die one day. Why waste time? But I guess that's one thing I really like about Prequel. Katia is a character who repeatedly hits rock bottom. But guess what? She always gets back up. And every time she is a little bit stronger. Every time she gets a little bit farther. She's made mistakes, but so have you, and so have I. Prequel is a story about failure, but it is also so much more than that. Katia is the literal definition of a wet cat, but throughout the story she grows and becomes the strong, amazing protagonist she always wanted to be. In fact, there are tons of aspects about this story which I specifically avoided in this video because it is so much more interesting to experience it's live and without spoilers. At first glance, this story just looks like a Torture the Miserable Cat simulator, but give it time and you'll see that it is actually the complete opposite. After all, this isn't even Katia's real story. All the pain and struggle, the heartache and misery, all of this, it's just the tragic backstory. We are only experiencing the prequel. And if you want to see me analyze a different webcomic about alcoholic felines, check out this video about Lackadaisy. I'm Joel Lamb, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.